Hello, welcome to this week's edition of the Turning Points podcast. Today, we had the pleasure and honor of speaking to Mahaila McKellar, who is a wonderful, beautiful, and joyful spirit in this world, a friend of Corinne's for over 20 years, and we kind of get into that a little bit, and as she shares her story, and what a beautiful story she had to tell.
Yeah, she's a Chopra connection, and we talked about that, how there's a lot of us who worked at the Chopra Center or were part of the, Deepak Chopra Center in California around 25 years ago. And still 25 years later, we're all still friends and connected. And that's actually been, more than a handful of people that have been on the podcast from that connection. So Mahaila is a beautiful meditation teacher, and she also is now a TikTok star.
Yes. And definitely listen to figure out how she became a trending TikTok star.
Mm-hmm. So enjoy the conversation.
Absolutely. Hey, Mahaila, how are you?
Good. Welcome. And it's Mahaila.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I told him.
I usually do that where as soon as I hit record, I forget how to talk, and I had to look down at your name, and what came out was the wrong way to say your name, so I apologize about that. Welcome to the podcast, Mahaila.
Thank you.
So we'll dive in real quick. I'll ask the question that we ask all our guests to kind of get things kick-started. Many seekers can recall that point in time when they started to question the so-called reality they were taught, that turning point of conditioned beliefs. Do you recall when your childhood programming no longer served you or worked for you, or when you became a spiritual seeker?
Well, there were several, as it is with most people. The first one, I was in high school, and I grew up in a somewhat Catholic environment. And the little town I lived in, it was little at the time. Now it's Silicon Valley, but at that time it was like orchards and a cannery. Everyone was Catholic. And so when I got into high school, I wanted to go to Sunday Mass. And do you want the long story about why I wasn't going to church before that? Or
whatever you want to share.
Okay. Pardon me. My dad basically believed that if you could talk to God from anywhere. You didn't need to go to church. That if you went to church, that was just the priest wanting money. And then my mother had been married before, and in the 1940s, you did not get a divorce, and she did. And so she was excommunicated. But she would take me to church with her in the middle of the week. We would go and she would light candles and whatnot, but there was no going to Mass. I went to catechism, got First Holy Communion, and then stopped going to catechism. And then, like I say, then in high school, I'm like, I want to be like all the other kids. Started going to Sunday Mass. And I think I went just twice. And the movie Cleopatra had come out, and I loved it. And the priest went on and on and on about her being, a harlot, and how it was on the list of movies that we were forbidden to see. And I was just like, nobody's going to tell me what to do. Only my parents can tell me what to do. And that was it. I didn't want to go back anymore. And somewhere around that same time, someone was talking to me about Jesus, and I had this feeling inside me, and I remember, I don't remember who I said this to, but it was, I believe in Jesus. I believe that was a real person, and I don't remember my exact words, but basically a spiritual person, someone who helped people. But what they're saying at church isn't right. And as I said that, I knew it. That knowing, that kind of knowing. I knew it inside. I was bewildered by that feeling of knowing, and yet I knew. So that was kind of the beginning, or the first time I was doing what you said, pulling away from the conditioning and going a slightly different direction.
And you were how old? You were in high school? So you're like,
I was in high school, yeah. And I was I'm going to say I was probably 17 because I think I drove myself to church. I'm pretty sure I was allowed to take the car, and that would have been 17. I wasn't allowed before that. And they had to know where I was going and when I'd be there.
It's nice. I mean, I want to hear more, but it's just hitting me right now. I mean, to be that young and to be even raised in the church and to have the confidence enough to say that, and the wherewithal and the solidity within that, like, it's like, why is it that some people, I hate to say buy into it, but some people really do. It really works for them in a profound way, the church and religions does. And then other people, it just never sinks in. And other people like you, it's like you're a teenager and it doesn't sync up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I was fortunate that my dad didn't believe in the organization itself. And so when I didn't want to go to catechism anymore, and that was just because I was afraid of the nuns. They were mean. And when I said, I don't want to go, and my dad's fine. You don't have to. And that was that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, having that other thing come in when I was 17, that feeling, that was really special.
Well, and that, that's a wonderful thing to have, the parent who was also from that same background, being supportive of you, finding your own path through that. And I think that's what's interesting, is having this profound truth emanating from within inside of you that, like you said, you knew that was the Protestant movement. I mean, that was, in short, kind of that, well, we believe that we can have this relationship with this truth, with this divine, personally. We don't need to have it through somebody else. And obviously wars and a lot of friction happened after that. But, to have that happen in your own life. And I think a parental, whether a father or mother, having that experience and then responding negative to that and being like, no, you have to, what I think people experience is, well, this is my truth, and you're telling me to go against my truth. Obviously, we can't intellectualize that necessarily when we're that age, but that's when more friction. So it is a very beautiful and positive thing that your dad was like, okay, I get why you feel that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I just sort of drifted along till I was 20. Which actually now that wasn't that many years, but at the time it seemed like it.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
I graduated from high school. I went to junior college for a year, and then I started working as a dancer professionally. And I was in Lake Tahoe, and one of my roommates, we'd have these breaks, like when somebody I'm going to say Lawrence Welk, but you guys probably who's that? Anyway,
no, I know who it is.
I know shows that would come in because I was in the chorus line that opened in the main showroom that opened the shows. So there would be a couple people a year, like Lawrence Welk. They didn't want dancers to open the show, so we'd have that time off. And so my roommate had gone home, and I stayed back. And I came across this book that she had on astrology. And at that time, I don't think I'd even heard of astrology. I mean, at all. And I started reading the book, and then I looked up my sign. I was like, oh my goodness. And so that was the next step for me of going, oh, there's something. In fact, that was when I started going, oh, wait a second. This resonates with me. This makes sense. I like this. I want to know more. And so that was the beginning of me going and seeking. That's when I started seeking. At 17, I didn't seek. At 20, I started seeking.
Well, that's the profound thing about it is, when or how that's going to hit your life. We talk about that a lot, where it's like, what is the mechanism that put somebody on a spiritual seeking path, and it's really just this gravity of something, and whether or not you become an astrologer, then I can't wait to hear what happens next. But whether you become an astrologer or what you're on a path with is is some kind of an intuition, something driving you to look more outwardly, to find the wisdom that exists beyond your own programming, beyond what you've been taught, or beyond perhaps the shallowness of the social, dogma that we tend to, get caught up in.
Uh-huh.
So then what happened?
Well, it's like the books kind of tell my story. Gosh, what happened? I've just had periods in my life where I was in astrology. And then I think the next thing after astrology was tarot cards. Then I learned tarot cards, started to dabble in numerology, didn't really care for that. And then I started transchanneling, and I started doing some healing work through channeling.
Okay, explain.
Transchanneling, that's when you go into trance, so you're not present, and you let another entity come through.
Okay, how did you start with that? Come on. Where does that even start?
That started because I met this gal who's now one of my closest friends and has been for many years. And oh my goodness, I was maybe 40 when I met her. So it's been a while. And I was hearing about channeling. I'd never heard of it. So I was invited to go to witness a channeling session. And I went there, and I was completely skeptical. I can't say the word. You know what I mean? I was a cynic in a way. I was like, I have an open mind, but I'm not just going to believe whatever you're saying. And that's kind of how I've been my whole life. So I get there. And I wouldn't even, like, when they had a break in the middle, I wouldn't even have herbal tea. I'm like, no, I'm not going to let anything influence me. I want to be totally alert, and it was, this fellow sitting up there, his name was Daryl, and he was channeling this entity that's like from another dimension, basically an alien from another dimension, God, I can't think of that alien's name now. Anyway, that's odd because for years I'd go to these sessions. At the end of the evening, it was like question and answer, and this gal next to me asked a question, and I don't remember now what the question was, but I thought to myself, that's the most ridiculous question. The answer is so obvious, blah, blah, blah. And this entity says to her, ask the woman next to you. She has your answer.
Whoa.
And I was like, and then of course I actually the way I remember now, the way I thought it in my head first was I thought the answer, and then I thought that was so ridiculous she didn't know that, because as I was responding, I'm telling her exactly what I'd just been thinking. And as I got to where I'd be saying that's so ridiculous, he stopped me. He goes, "Thank you very much. That's enough."
Wow.
I'm like, oh my goodness. And then I asked a question, and as he was answering me, I stopped hearing the voice from the outside, and I was hearing it all inside. And it was such, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. It's been so long. It was such a moment for me. Afterwards, I got in my car and I just sat there and I just cried. But I was crying from joy because it was a sense of going home. It's like I'd gone home. I'd found home. I'd finally found home. Because even though I enjoyed the astrology and, and the tarot was fun and, let's predict our futures and your future and everything, that was a whole other thing. And that was when I started meditating regularly. It's like a close cousin to the channeling. And I got into that. But that's skipping ahead a few years. But yeah, so the channeling. So I started going to the channel, and then I wanted to learn how to channel. And my friend Sean, who had taken me to this thing, she had just started doing some classes. And my daughters were young. And so I was like, well, and she was, she didn't have her own studio yet. So she was teaching people's homes. And she'd have a class of 12 students, and one of those students would volunteer their home. So I'm like, well, I've got 2 young kids. In order for me to know for sure I'm going to be there, it's going to be at my house. You never know with kids. It's what they need, right? And so that's what we did. We had them here in my house, and it was amazing. I mean, I had sensed various entities living in my house for years already, and then they came forth, and it was a great experience, and good for my daughters too, to have that happening around them.
Can I talk about a couple things here? So, first off, had you said you felt a sense of like you were home when you had that heard the internal voice, interacted with that. Prior to that point, had you ever felt? Did you feel like a stranger in this world, in this reality? Did you ever feel like you weren't at home, or was that the first time you felt like, oh, I didn't know I wasn't home, and now I also feel like home? What was that relationship with before that point?
Okay, well, now we're going to go back to when I was probably 4 years old, and I used to have these light beings visit me when I'd be in bed at night. And it was very cool, and I enjoyed it. And then one day I told my mom, like, Mommy, there's somebody there. And she's like, nobody's there. And then I became afraid because I knew someone was there. So then I thought, well, if my mommy doesn't know they're there and my daddy doesn't know they're there, then they must be bad people. And then they didn't visit me anymore until years later.
And what was the form? Was it light, or what was the?
Yeah, it was. It would be like seeing a golden shadow or silhouette. I didn't really see facial features, but I felt like I was looking at someone who was looking at me.
So there felt like a personality or a consciousness, or there was an awareness to the shape, not just a shape. There was a personality there. Right.
It was a person. It was a golden person. Sometimes two.
So did you feel like you kind of, that was shut off then for a very long time? Had that been shut off all the way until you said about 40 when you had this experience?
No. I'm sorry. No. When I was 26, I took a yoga class for the first time. I was telling Corinne, up until, I don't know, somewhere in my early 20s, I didn't know the difference between yoga and yogurt. These things were completely foreign. They did not exist in the town that I grew up in or within my family. They just does not exist.
I love that. That is fucking hilarious.
and I remember trying to distinguish between the two. And then I took a yoga class, and then I knew. And it was a wonderful class this woman taught. It was 2 hours long, once a week. And about a year and a half into it, I became pregnant for the first time. And when I was about 5 months pregnant, they came back. Those entities came back. And at first I was frightened. And but I mentioned it to my yoga teacher. And she said, oh, those are, I don't remember if she said my guardian angels or my higher self. I don't remember what term she used. But basically, these are loving beings that are looking over you. And I said, well, then why do they leave when I turn the light on? I'm like scrambling for the light to try to turn it on. And she said, because they don't want to frighten you. They're not there. They feel bad, so they leave. So then I stopped I stopped myself from being afraid, and then they came more frequently and stayed and became more part of my life. Also, what happened, actually, it wasn't until I was channeling and I started doing some healing with the channeling that I found out that my paternal grandmother had been psychic. It was for my father. I don't know if he was embarrassed by it. I don't know, because I never got to talk to him about it, because my mother told me after my father had passed away and then I was doing the channeling, she was like, well, of course you can do that. Your not that I believe in that kind of thing, but your father's mother, when the Depression happened and they were all starving, nobody could get a job. She used to tell cards. She used to get a deck of cards and tell fortunes to make money so they could get food. And I'm like, what?
Wow.
That's great.
What?
So that's something that she could have told you when you were 4, when you started to see that at the first time, because she might have known it. But that's what's funny is how just
I never thought of that.
well, yeah, I was just like, she must have known it at that point. But it's funny that well, first off, I mean, I think it's a great example of you kind of know it's a benevolent space or a benevolent being or a benevolent spirit when they leave the moment you start panicking when they show up. I mean, that's kind of the token phrase. There's always, spirit is always there, wanting to come into your life. It's always trying to interact with you, but always gentle, and it's always subtle, because it's going to wait for what you can handle. You're never going to get more than you can handle. And it's funny, like, we are the ones that shut ourselves off from that. With fear or ignorance or, whatever that might be. And so that's a beautiful example of how something, it's like, and what a perfect answer from your yoga instructor of like, well, of course they're going away. They can tell you're afraid and they don't want to scare you. So they go away, and it's like, oh shit, that makes so much sense. But in the time, it's not culturally accepted that this can happen to somebody and be something that's quote unquote normal. So yeah, our instinct is to react to these so-called strange things. But for you, that was as real as a 4-year-old as it is as an adult now. And man, so you must have had a lot of fun channeling then for years and developing that muscle, that intuitive muscle with everything.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yes and no. Because I did that again I'm a as a seeker. I bounced from thing to thing. Then I had my crystal era where I was collecting quartz crystals and amethyst. Still have this huge geode in my living room, and I was exploring that energy, and then pyramid energy, and and then when my first daughter was born, is when I learned to meditate for the first time. I learned transcendental meditation, and my husband took me to learn, and I thought I didn't know what I was getting into. And then having a baby, I never really could meditate, right? I didn't have that time to meditate, stay-at-home mom and everything. But throughout the years, I had done it here and there a little bit. And I always liked it when I did, but I never stuck with it. And then in 1993, my friend Sean, who taught me how to channel in the 80s, said, hey, I want you to go to this book signing luncheon with me. And I'm like, okay. She goes, Marianne Williamson's going to be there. I'm like, okay. And she was in Deepak Chopra. And I said, what's that? Because Sean had also introduced me to crop circles. I took my daughters to England and we explored crop circles way back,
Wow.
and sat in the fields. And anyway, so yeah, so I went and I was totally charmed by Deepak's talk. And then when I bought his books and when I went up to sign them, his presence when he was so in the moment, and he had this twinkle in his eye, and I was like, oh my goodness, I want what he has. And then I was like, wait, I already know how to do that. I'm just not doing it.
Right.
And so that then was when I committed to myself that I'm going to start meditating all the time, not just a little here and a little there. And I thought, now what's keeping me from doing that? Well, because, I don't want to maybe separate myself from the people I'm with in order to go in the next room and meditate. So I took my mother and my daughters, my sister, we all went to tea. I had them all learn tea. And then a couple of years later, Deepak started his program. He opened his the Chopra Center in La Jolla and started his program. And when did you become a teacher, Corinne? Was it 90?
I think it was the second class. I think it was in 1996 or 7.
Yeah. And I learned I became a teacher in 98.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we met in 99 in Tulum.
In Tulum, Mexico, at the teachers retreat, which was amazing.
Yeah.
50 teachers and the Chopra staff and Deepak and David Simon in a small retreat center where we had these palapas, and they had the swinging beds. They had a mattress and these swinging beds. It was right on the beach. And it was so fun. And I was singing, and Mahaila loved the singing that we did. And Angela, I'd play my guitar and Angela would play the drum.
Yeah. Yeah. And we did a drumming night thing, and it was great. It was great. And no electricity.
Oh, wow.
No electricity.
That's right. It was,
Yeah.
Pretty rustic back then. And so what was your experience like then with the meditation? Like, because for me, I feel like I got so much clarity when I started meditating. Like, I feel like my life, I woke up when I started meditating. Like, even though I had a life before, I was 27 when I learned how to meditate, I feel like I got on my soul path when I started meditating, and everything just became so clear. Was anything like that? Because obviously it's something powerful because you became a teacher.
Yeah. As they say, I found my tribe at that point. I would say that I found a peace, an inner peace. And I remember I used to I love wishing on a star, right? Going out at night and looking up and finding, and then the first star I would see every night, I would wish on it. And for years and years and years, I had particular wishes. And at some point, I think it was probably after, I don't know, God, after we went to that one in India with Deepak, and I had a meditation, sunrise meditation on a sand dune on this little trip that I remember. There was a group of us that went, and then we ended up meeting up with you at some point. But I was on this sand dune, and the scarabs were running around on the sand. It was really, and I had this scarf over my head to keep the flies from getting at me, and then I got into this meditation, and as we came out of meditation, this whole other thing started happening. And I know, Sean, in one of yours, you talked about speaking in tongues, and I think that's what I started doing. And I remember afterwards thinking to myself, if a monkey had fallen in front of me at that point, I would have worshipped. It would have become my God. Because I was like, this whole thing opened up in me. And it was really something. What came out of that and everything else from being with what I call Chopra people and that environment and then integrating that into my life was I started looking up at the star at night. Every night I'd look at a star, and it would just be like, I wish I may, I wish I might. And I just surrender. Just surrender. It's like, I trust it. I just surrender. And I remember when I first heard people talking about surrendering, I was like, oh my goodness, that sounds so weak. You can't surrender. And then I got it. Like, yes, surrender.
Yeah. Well, and that's a wonderful story. I mean, and I love coming to surrender like that, because the only thing that you changed with wishing on a star is that you didn't impart your own projection into it anymore, right? You maintained the practice, the mindfulness of looking up and wishing, but what you removed was the ego, essentially, right? The what I want to get out of this. You replace that with the surrender, and you're right. I mean, it sounds like you say surrender and people think that's weakness. And I think one of my favorite, I don't know how true, I said one of my favorite things, then I followed up with, I don't know how true this is, but in the Bible, they say, Christ says, the meek shall inherit the earth. And for a long time, that was translated as meek, as in meager, small, weak. Mm-hmm. And what I've heard, and I'm just gonna call this true because it sounded like a really good thing. And the person that translated it said, what meek actually means is he who has a sword but keeps it sheathed shall inherit the earth. That's what meek means in a truer, more true translation. So it's not that we couldn't fight. It's not that we can't battle. It's not that we don't have the strength. It's that we choose not to use that strength or use that, sword for any other purpose than to serve. And that's kind of feels like what you experience is, well, yeah, I could wish all these things that I want, but I'm just going to wish and then let it be what it's going to be. Sorry, that's my version of hearing what you say, but that's a very powerful thing to have happened. As small as it might seem, is very powerful.
In India.
India. I mean, I know, Corinne, that you really love India. I've been there 3 times. And each time I've come away with having experienced my highest highs and my lowest lows, sometimes from one moment to the next.
Yes.
And each time I've been there, I have thought to myself, what on earth am I doing here? I could have flown to Paris instead. What am I doing here?
And
Seriously.
Believe me, I have thought that many times myself in India.
Oh my goodness. I remember when you broke your leg and all this. Anyway.
No, the first time I went to India was the How to Know God trip. That was my first time in India. And I was traveling with LaRhonda. I don't know if you remember LaRhonda. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know her. Like, I had only met her at one of the seminars, and then we met in Chicago, flew to Rishikesh, spent a week in Rishikesh, and then took a magical train ride to Agra, where we did the How to Know God thing for 5 days, and then went to Jaipur. But I realized then, and I've seen it every year since then, because I've practically been going to India every year for 21 years. I think I missed 4 years in that time only. And, but I realized that India magnifies everything, which is basically what you described. It magnifies all of our desires and our weaknesses and our strengths. And it puts it under a microscope and magnifies it 1,000 times. So like I saw that in LaRhonda, and in the interaction with her, it was very intense. And in myself, every time still I go there, it has helped me to really know myself, to really know what the highs are and what turns me on, in every way. And then also what the lows are and what all my weaknesses are. Like, it just is in your face fully.
Yes.
That's what I love about it.
Fully. Yes. Yeah. I mean, one time, and just the you get used to, and I mean, the longest I was there was 6 weeks, and And that's when I went to Osho's. But you get used to, I mean, here we have, you go out in nature and you see a squirrel or you see a raccoon. There, it's the pigs and the cows and the everything
and the ox and the peacocks.
Yeah,
and the
it's
monkeys.
all there, everywhere, all the time, and it's just so raw. Everything is so raw, and then so colorful. And I don't remember which trip it was. It must have been after I was there for the 6 weeks. Anyway, I used to come home, and at the time, one of my daughters was going to college on the East Coast. So I would always fly in and see her on my way back to LA. And I got into Boston, and it would have been Osho. It was after the 6 weeks. I got into Boston, and it looked so... First, I was really looking forward to getting home to civilization. And then it seemed so empty and sterile. It took me, I was in this reverse culture shock. It took me a while to get used to it. And I went shopping. For some reason, I needed an outfit for something I was going to with my daughter. This is Crystal I'm talking about. And I went to, I think it was an Ann Taylor shop. Anyway, I ended up buying a multicolor sequin top and a long chiffon-y kind of skirt that had all these different colored beads on it. And I didn't realize until I was dressed, and my daughter looks at me and she goes, "Oh, Mom, did you get that in India?"
You're trying to recreate India in Boston.
I didn't even know I was doing that. Yeah.
That's what India does. It permeates at every level, and it takes months to integrate and to realize how it's changed you and what it's done and changed your perspective. Because it is it's how I describe my ayahuasca experience too. It's like the most intense thing I've ever done, but also one of the most and hardest, but also one of the most powerful. And India is like that. Like every time I go, it's like, it's difficult. It's beautiful. It's amazing. It's horrible. Sometimes it's challenging. It's to me, it's living. Like to me, we're so comfortable here that it's not really life. That's what I loved when you described that you landed in Boston. It was like empty. It's like everything is so alive. Your sight, sound, touch, taste, smell is like intense in India. And here everything is so tame and controlled, and everybody drives and they follow the rules and drive on the right side of the street. And, I remember Satya, and the first time he was driving in LA, he's like, there's all this traffic on the 405. And he's like, why aren't you in that lane over there? There's nobody over the white line to the right. He's like, you could just easily go around the traffic right there. And I'm like, no, you can't do that.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think it was the second time I was there. So I should have known which side of the street they drove on. And it was like a little car with a driver, and then I had some kind of a tour guide that was taking me somewhere to go shopping. Anyway, at some point I actually turned to her and I had to ask. I'm like, so which side of the street do you drive? Because they just go.
You couldn't tell.
It's the cosmic dance, right? They just go wherever.
It's great.
Yeah.
So I, what I've been thinking about with a lot of these conversations now, it's like we have these turning points and we are on this journey. And I'd like to share with people, like, what happens how does the life change when you have these turning points and you're living life as a seeker and you're in sort of the more of the aware field, self-discovery aware. How does that affect your life now? Like, how has it affected your life along the way, the choices that you make? And even, I'd love for you to share that TikTok story, because to me, it seems funny. It's a great story, but to me, it's a testament to you living life from that soul level and being open and yeah. So and anything else that you can think of that is a result of your journey?
Okay. Pardon me while I
Yeah, I'll take a sip too. But.
Wet my whistle, as they say. Okay, so good genes in our family. So I always looked a little younger than I am. And my daughters now have that too. My mother did too. She was very proud of that.
How old was she when she died?
She was 6 weeks away from being 100.
That's what I thought.
Wow.
Yeah. And she loved it. She was, probably 80 when they would card her at the airport because she would have purchased the senior citizens price ticket, and they'd ask for an ID so they'd know she was really 60, but she loved that. Anyway, but when I was in my 40s, mid 40s, I never hid my age until I was in my 40s because I noticed that people would treat me differently. Like, one moment they'd be treating me like, I was a fellow whatever. And then all of a sudden you're how old? Oh, and then they, treat me differently. Somehow I wasn't in on the joke anymore. I was, they had to respect me a certain way. I wasn't part of the group. Anyway, so I started hiding my age. And I just wouldn't tell it. If somebody asked me, I just wouldn't tell them. And I did that for years. I was even online dating, and I would put some age, because you have to, but it was always be way younger. And then in my little bio, I would say, I want to start by saying that the age on here is not the correct age. But I wouldn't tell them what the correct age was. I would just let them know this is a lie.
That's awesome.
And then we'll take it from there.
Yeah.
So, so I went for years like that. And then a year ago, I got on TikTok, part of the what are we going to do during the pandemic? And plus, I like social media. I was already on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Periscope, which I don't know that even exists anymore. But anyway, I was on those different platforms and had fun posting. And so TikTok is, I became aware of, and my daughter suggested I do it, and that I, with my cats. And at this point, I was regularly leading meditation sessions on Facebook and Instagram, and that's what I was focused on. She's like, oh, we'll just have some fun with on TikTok with the cats. I'm like, okay. But I was putting a lot of time into it because I like things to time up with the music. And, so I would do, spend an hour or two for a 15-second video. And I was getting discouraged because I didn't have that many followers, maybe 100, 150. And then, just get maybe 10 or 15 views. And so my daughter says, Mom, this is what you need to do. Because I don't know if I've mentioned here, but I was a professional dancer before I married and had my children. So she's like, put your tap shoes on and dance. And then I didn't actually say it. I think it was a banner above me. I just turned 74. I was a professional dancer. Oh, and then, I was a professional dancer, and then cut in pictures of me when I was a dancer in my 20s, right? And then cut back to me dancing, and I still love to dance. And when she told me to do that, I actually came up with, I think I wasn't going to say my age. I was going to do everything but the age part. I'm like, I used to be a professional dancer. And she's like, no. You have to tell people your age. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't. For 30 years, I hadn't told anybody how old I was. And so I caved and I did it. And I have to say, and she helped me edit it after I got the raw footage together, and she helped edit it. And I posted it, and I'm going to get teary about this. And overnight, by the next morning, she came to my house, And she got her, phone up and started videoing me. And she goes, Mom, I want you to look at your TikTok. And I was like, so I open it up. And at that point, maybe it had been, 14 hours or something. And 150,000 people had looked at this video.
Wow.
And I don't even remember how many, maybe 1,000 comments. Or 500. It was a lot of comments. And I'd gone, I don't know, I had 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. I don't remember the numbers now. Thousands. I had thousands of followers. And I started crying. And, and she wouldn't let me mention her. She would not let me mention, because she's an actress that people know. And a lot of people who follow me on social media have found me and follow me because I'm her mother. And so she wouldn't let me mention her. And I'd not mentioned with the cats or anything. I'd not tied any of it together. It was just me with the cats. So she's like, you can't mention me. I'm like, oh, okay, fine. Because I was going to say my daughter told me I should do this. So I couldn't do that. And she did. And she, oh gosh, I'm going to cry. I'm sorry. Anyway, she's like, see, Mom, this is you.
Yeah.
This was about you and what you have to offer.
Yeah, that's so wise, because, it could be taken as, oh, you can't use my name, but it wasn't about that at all. It's that she wanted you to empower you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you don't mind me asking, what was the general reception in the comments that people would write back, or, what was the general reception? Just overwhelming?
Hell no.
They didn't believe it.
Hell no, you're not 70. No way are you 74. Yeah. That was the, or no way. Because I responded to every single person who commented. And I kept doing that for days, because it kept, like I was telling you guys earlier now, it leveled off at close to 500,000 views. And I think it might be up to 500,000 now. And this was back last August, I think. So it's been, 6, 7, 8 months. Anyway, so I ended up responding way a lot. No way. I'm be like, way. Oh, yes.
So how did that feel for you? Did you feel empowered, or were you terrified after you had posted the video?
Oh, after I posted it, I wasn't terrified. I wasn't empowered. I was not comfortable. I wasn't comfortable. I loved it. It's like I looked at it and went, hey, this is good. I gave my daughter good material and she made a nice little video out of it and it works. So, from that, I'm like, okay. But then I was kind of like, but is anybody going to care?
Yeah.
And what difference does it make? So what? I'm 74. Anyway, so I had all of that. And then I forgot about it and I went to bed. Got up the next day and yeah.
And she videotaped your response?
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then she posted it.
Oh, that's great. I think that's when I might have seen it on Facebook, as I'm not on TikTok. And so I saw it on Facebook and I was like, I loved it. So is there any way I'll be able to get a copy of that and put it in this Zoom? I can always link it to your Facebook one, but could I get that? Because it's a short clip and I could put it in here.
I'll see if I can. I at least have it on my computer. It might not be on my phone anymore, but yeah, I should be able to send that.
Awesome, because I'd love to be able to put that edited into the video. People, it'd be really special. It wouldn't be in the audio version, but in the video version, it would be. I think people would love it.
Yeah. Now, you'll tell me which one you're asking for when we're
the tap one.
Yeah, we want to see the tap one, the dance one.
Oh, the tap one. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I've got that.
Yeah.
I thought you were talking about Danica's.
No. We want you, girl.
Well, no, the one she posted was me, but
Yes.
I thought you meant, I
Yes,
thought you
that
were talking about the response one.
No, I want all about you, all about you. So I'm thank you for sharing that story, because I've known you for many years, and so I always knew that. I mean, and I totally understood, because my mom's the same way about her age. Is that people, and I think people do. It's not about you; it's about other people, feeling differently. I totally agree with that. But I do feel like, the way that you've lived your life, and the meditation and the spiritual journey that you've been on, the mystical, really, I feel like you've been on quite a mystical journey that you've been on, really had led you to that, to be able to do that. And also to have something that just kind of fell into, that happens. Cause I mean, there's millions of people that are trying to create viral videos all the time. And most viral videos happen by accident. There's, which is, it's beautiful.
Yeah, the couple that I've had go viral in a much smaller way, because now typically, I mean, TikTok kind of vacillates in its algorithm anyway, but typically my views are in the hundreds, maybe 1,500 at the most, for most. And then I've had a couple of others that went up to 25, 30, 40,000. One was for turmeric paste, because what came out of that, the people's responses are, what do you do? What's your skincare regime? How do I'm like, well, I meditate, and I drink clean water, and all the different health stuff that I've done since I was in my 20s. So I've been posting a lot. In fact, this last series that I've been doing, recent series I've been doing, is on people making their own spice mixes, like for taco seasoning or Italian seasoning, rather than getting the packaged stuff that's got, preservatives and anti-caking agents and all that. So, like do it organic and have it be fresh. And it's also bringing in antioxidants. And that's kind of where my TikTok is. And then I have a lot of fun just doing whatever the trends are. The ones I can do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to me, that's living a creative life. I mean, it's living life from intuition and creativity and fun and lightheartedness, and not doing it because you're trying to get something out of it, but just because you enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, taking something that that you identify with as something that's uncomfortable, or something that, you shy away from, like your age, and ultimately what's funny about it is that's your definition of like, well, I'm 74, like that's in your head the whole time. But as soon as you say that, nobody else thinks that. Like, you don't have that identity to anybody else except for yourself, because you shared it. And as soon as you kind of release that apprehension of, sharing that something that maybe you're afraid of or apprehensive of, now you have this whole outlet to connect with people on something that actually, that can have a deeper, more expansive connection with people, which is, oh, well, if you really are 74, how the fuck do you stay so young looking? I need to know that information. And now you can share that with people. And what a beautiful thing to come out of, such a happenstance experience.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've been having fun. Yeah.
Yes, and that's what we talk about this all the time. What Roger at the end of his interview, and Roger's, of course, Mahaila's teacher as well.
I love Roger. I love Roger.
We adore him so much, and Sean does now too. And he's like, don't take it all so seriously. Have fun. Like that's that was the first thing Deepak said. The first lecture I saw him, he's like, enlightenment means to lighten up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he actually broke the ice with a lie, actually. Roger lied to us.
Oh, my gosh.
About how I don't know if he could tell that we were, like, maybe he could read it on me, but, like, we asked, how did you meet Deepak? And he goes into this very detailed, very elaborate story about he's like, I'm sitting at this bar, and there's this guy, and he's throwing peanuts, and we're just like, Are you serious?
This Indian guy throwing peanuts.
Yes.
And I'm
we're
like, and he was telling, because Roger's so good at storytelling. I'm like, oh, this is not true.
You know,
Oh, maybe it is true.
You know that's not how they met.
I forgot. I was like, I don't know.
Yeah. So we're like buying into this whole story, and all of a sudden he's like, we're like, is that true? And he's like, no, of course it's not true. I met him at a meditation retreat. Like, obviously, where else are we gonna fucking meet? So it was just fun, but that was kind of his take on everything. And I think that's where the real wisdom is. It's like, man, there's a lot of ways we could take life seriously, but I don't know if it gets you any further than just chilling out and lightening up and, having fun with it and just kind of going with the flow.
Yeah. Because you can still be a responsible person.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. But having fun is and that's my mom's mantra. I mean, I learned that from my mom. My mom's had a good time her whole life, and she's 82 and she still continues to have a good time. And she was wearing leather mini skirts and boots up to her knees until she was she only stopped because she started to hurt her ankles because she would wear these heels that were like this big until she was 75. She was dressed in leather mini skirts. And then we banned her from the heels like this because she almost broke her ankle a couple of times. I'm like, Mom.
I haven't had much excuse to dress up, but when I do, I've got my 4-inch heels. I love them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you got those dancer's legs.
Oh,
you do.
There's something this was a couple of years ago. I was on a TV show called Home and Family on the Hallmark Channel. And Danica was on, my daughter. And so it was at Christmas time, and they had me on to, in the cooking segment, to do this Yule log. And so I had my heels there, and I put them on, and somebody came over like they were going to help me out. And Danica's like, my mother's got this. Don't worry about her.
She can put her own heels on. She can do that.
She can walk. Once she's got those on, she can walk. Because, there's like all the different, when you're on a set like that, there's all the big cords all over the floor that you can trip on. And they were all worried. I'm like, but I was so happy that she was so confident in me. I'm like, I better not trip now.
Well, Mahaila, you certainly, like I said, have lived a creative, unique life, and have always lived life on your terms, doing what you want to do and not what society has told you, and made those decisions and had a good time and had a lot of adventures. And I'm so happy you came on the podcast, and that you've been enjoying the podcast too, and that you came on, because you're always a blast to talk to, and I just love you.
I love you too. And now you too, Sean.
Oh, I love you too, man. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And
now, where is it you live, Sean? Where are you?
I'm in Wisconsin, southeastern Wisconsin.
Okay. So you're in the cold.
Yeah. Yes. I love that area. Yeah. It was like 55 degrees today. And I put flip-flops on for the first time. I'm trying to summon spring to come a little earlier.
There you go. There you go.
So you get used to it. But yeah. So I'm up here with my family. I got 3 kids. And so it's really enjoyable to hear you, tell stories about, how supportive, but also kind of, you got this banter, you're being pushed by your kids, but they're in a loving way, in a very supportive way. And that's something we're trying to cultivate, early on in their age, is just like have fun with each other and create trust and, a bond that, you could be hard on each other and sometimes be on each other's nerves, but we all know very deeply that we, love each other. And it sounds like you have that with your girls, and it sounds like you've had a wonderful life with them. So yeah, I appreciate it very much. It was wonderful to meet you, and you're beautiful. You're amazing. And, I got to see this TikTok video now, because it went viral. So I got to see it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has really been fun.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for joining us.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
And welcome to Turning Points Say More section with Mahaila McKellar. What a lovely and joyful and just beautiful spirit that one is.
Yes, I adore Mahaila. We've been friends for a very long time. We met let's do the math. We met in Tulum, Mexico. It would have been in the year 2000.
When you say it like that, it sounds like in the year 2000.
1999. So yeah, 21 to over 20 years ago we met.
Wow.
And she's just a doll. And she just has lived such a life of, like, we didn't go into, her I don't know, the choices in her life. She just is she lives in LA and she has daughters and she has a home. But other than that, she's like a total gypsy heart. She, in fact, we were talking on the phone last night. She wanted to get the lights and all. So we talked on the phone for like an hour last night. And she was saying, she's like, Corinne, I would have lived your life if I'd not gotten married and had kids. So she still has that. She has that in her heart. And that's who she is. And she's just a very, just super creative. She's an amazing cook. And, just the fact that she loves doing the social media thing, like she really enjoys it. She's just full of joy.
Yeah.
And to me, that's why we do the work.
Right. That's why you do the work, because you want to bring that joy into whatever it is that you do. And, she's very open and she's very kind of matter of fact about certain experiences in her life that, are quite mystical. And, that the funny thing is, like, every story she told, you kind of knew, like, there's tons of stories that, like, are attached to this story that, like, you could go into deeper detail.
The tangents. You go the tangents. Yeah.
And, just the different, mystical practices that she, took on for a while and then let go of. But she, the way she talks about them, it's like fine pottery on a shelf. It's like, I looked at this piece of pottery for a while, and then I looked at this piece of pottery for a while. And each time you're like, hold on, what kind of channeling? I mean, the fact that she talked about something that you nor I had ever heard of. And I mean, there's not a lot of things in the mystics that I haven't heard of, or that, through whatever. And like the fact that she like landed on one, it's like, oh yeah, it's like when you channel a bunch of like different spirits, like, hold on, girl, you got to stop on that. Like, you got to pause on that. And but for her, it's just, that
was the next step on her journey. Yeah.
It's the next step on her journey. And I love that very openness, and just, it is all part of the journey. It is all part of getting to that, that meditation she talked about in India, where she surrendered. And, there was, and that was a wonderful story. I mean, I just think that's such a great example of surrender and letting go of the ego. And, we were talking about that in the Facebook Live conversation, kind of the trusting intuition, but then the surrendering into that intuitive flow state. And you stop manifesting from a desire. I want to get this out of something, and you start manifesting from that flow state. Well, that's a great example of that. I was just so in meditation, I was just so connected that it just felt, I can wish. I'm allowed to wish. I'm going to wish, but I'm going to wish for whatever it is that consciousness or that awareness or whatever she was feeling in that moment, to guide her through that, and want what spirit wants for you. That's a fucking powerful state to be in, for sure.
Yeah. Surrender, man. I mean, that's one of my favorite sayings. I guess it's a Star Trek saying. I'm not a Trekkie, but it's a Star Trek saying. Well, at Adi Ashanti, it's one of his favorite sayings, and it's resistance is futile.
But resistance, yes, I love that. That's from the Borg. My dad was a Trekkie, and the Borg was this like collective cyborg beings, and they actually kidnapped Captain Picard at one time, and he becomes a Borg. I know all about Star Trek, man. I shouldn't lean on too much, but yes, the whole thing was like, we know that you're going to surrender, so resistance is futile, and I think I think spirit works in similar way. They're not cyborg entities that totally take over your body, but we kind of got into the subtleties of conscious beings, conscious awareness, conscious energy force. It introduces itself to us at different times. It shows up for us in different ways. Man, I like that we got into the conversation about, well, why do they always go away then when I get, freaked out? And it's because you're freaked out. Spirit consciousness, it's subtle because it doesn't need your participation to exist. It asks your participation, and it shows up and encourages your participation, and it even guides you and moves you towards your own surrender and your participation. But it is not something that depends on us. It is not something that requires our worship. It is not something that even requires our acknowledgement. And yet it just constantly shows up. It knows, I'm giving it an identity, but it knows that we will eventually surrender. We kind of talked about that after the podcast. All paths lead to that surrender, it seems. Why or how or what the mechanism is beyond me, but you want to be in that flow state because that flow state is pure connectedness. It's not about wanting. It's not about desire. And I don't know. There was a lot of great examples of that in her stories about that.
Pure connectedness. Yeah. I liked it when you were talking about the meek shall inherit the earth and your definition of the meek. And I wanted to add to that. For me, it has to do with surrender. The word is humble. Kind of what Alea was talking about, like when she started to teach, she just wanted to lay at everybody's feet and bow to them, like and bow lower and bow lower. And it's so interesting because the ego, that's the last thing the ego wants to do. So and it can be so misinterpreted, like, well, if I bow down, I'm giving up my power, or some people think, or if I'm humble, I'm not being confident or whatever it is. And it's fine. You have to be with wherever you're at. But for me at this point, bowing and being humble, and it is all about the surrender to, and to me, there's nothing more natural than surrendering to what is.
Yeah.
It's like the hardest thing for people to do, but it's the most natural to surrender, because if you're resisting against what is in the present moment, it's like whatever it is, you're resisting feeling sad. Okay. Or you're resisting a conflict you have with a neighbor, or you're resisting money problems, or, you're angry at it. When you resist what is happening, you're literally fighting against the forces of the entire universe, because it's what's happening right now.
Yeah. And the reality of it. So, right? Yeah. Yes. And it's funny because it's actually impressive the amount of storytelling you have to be doing to be oblivious to the present moment. And yet we are all very good at that. Or rather, we focus so much on the ego, which is telling us stories about
the past and the future. Yeah.
Exactly. I was going to say the future and the past. You said the past and the future. It's things that are not real and things that are not right in front of you, and they're fighting for our attention. And yeah, man, it's a strange thing, because I know that I subscribe to that same idea of like, well, surrender that's weakness. And it is when it's surrendering to anything other than the almighty consciousness that exudes. I mean, yes, if you surrender to an opponent, if you surrender, but I think that's what's so fucking interesting, is that's in most stories to a certain degree. I mean, take Christ for an example. All that guy did was surrender. He surrendered to his own. He knew exactly what was going to happen asked that it might not happen to him, felt I shouldn't be asking this, but I'm going to ask it because I'm afraid, admitted to that. I'm afraid this is going to happen to me. Do I really need to go through this? And intuition said, yes, you're going to die in one of the most worst imaginable ways possible, and said, okay, and never fought that. And he knew that he was the model for that. I mean, and there's plenty of other examples of, surrendering and neutrality and just the teachings about all this are right there. And there's so many other scriptures, there's so many other wisdoms and philosophies that kind of speak on that. A lot of the same points. And it's amazing how easy it is for us to miss those in all of those different wisdoms. And it's because of how distracted we are by our own stories, by our own, false identities. And that's the funny thing is there's almost no greater false prophet or false idol than ourselves. We are our worst false idols, right? Because we worship ourselves. We tell our stories. We have self-preservation of our own identities to the point that I think that's why it can be very difficult to awaken, to get on that spiritual path, because if you're not doing it with a light heart, and if you don't have the joy or the lightened upness about it, that resistance of futile thing is going to be very, very uncomfortable for a very long time. And it is no matter what, but it's, how quickly you succumb to that humble space.
Yeah. Yeah. Mahaila has had, I would say, and everybody's perspective is different, but I would say a charmed life in some ways. She hasn't had a huge amount of struggles from the outside looking in. I'm sure she's had struggles along the way, and there's been, of course, pain and certain things she's challenged with. But it's so interesting how what we do with what we're given and who struggles. Like you and I always think of you and I are we were tortured mentally for many years. Like, I think that's why we love each other so much. It's because I recognize, I just look back at myself now, my story and my memoirs. And it's like, I don't get that from Mahaila. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. I don't get that she struggled as much as I did anyway with internal, the crap going on and the, it seemed now looking back of my own doing. And yet it was what I needed to wake up. It was the perfect amount of pain and suffering that I needed, and was a hell of an adventure, looking back on it. So.
Yeah. And I think that's very interesting. And one thing that came up for me as you were saying that is the very first example where she talked about being in the Catholic Church and, being 16 or 17 years old and, having this very profound knowing truth that hit her, and being like, no, I like Christ. I like that, but this doesn't resonate with me. And then to have her father be accepting of that, that's an example of when you have a sense of intuition and it's cultivated and it's catered to and it's nurtured. I think one of the things that I've struggled with is not having that acceptance in earlier forms of intuition. I knew at a pretty young age that there was something different about me. I feel like I was very aware. I was present. Shit wasn't adding up to me. Like I was very present to that. Like society didn't make sense. And I mean, there was a couple moments where I remember, speaking, but like, I'm just different. I'm not saying it from like, I'm different and special. And I was like, I'm different. I'm freaking the fuck out. I don't know what's happening, but I'm looking out at the world and it's not making sense. And I know this is not just because I'm hormonal and I'm going through puberty and it's fucking high school and it sucks. I mean, I knew going into high school I couldn't wait to get out of it. Not just because I'm like, what the fuck are we going to do here? And I remember bringing that up, and kind of the reaction was kind of scoffed off. And it wasn't, I've lived a charmed life in a lot of ways. My turmoil and my struggle has come almost exclusively from my internal mechanisms too. But I'm recognizing the difference there was, well, that's a good story. Ha ha ha, honey. Yeah, you're different, whatever, kind of mocked. But you still got to go to church because that's what we do, and there's no reason. And my dad didn't go to church. He was not a spiritual person. Wouldn't even get on that level with me in our conversation. He was dealing with his own shit. But that was a moment of intuition of, all right, I have intuition, and now I got to speak my truth. I got to tell my parents I'm a fucking weirdo, because that's how I felt. And it was kind of just put into a box of, oh no, everybody experiences this weird different thing. You're not different. It's just something you're feeling. Just go to church and everything will be okay. Versus that empowerment. And I'm not comparing Mahaila and I by any means. These are our own journeys or whatever. But I think that's a good example of why it's important to nurture and empower each other when we're having these moments of intuition, when we're having these moments of divine intervention to a certain degree. And I think that's amazing that she had that, especially, being 74, can't do the math that quick, but that was at a time where it was not acceptable to rebel against that. And the fact that her dad was very open and very comforting to that, that's gorgeous. That's a beautiful thing. And that's something to be humble about. And she is, and so I agree with you. It's like, I feel like we have these very small little trauma points that can really dictate a big part of our programming in weird ways. And that story sticks out to me. There's like 3 stories that I have that really stick out to me a lot. And I know they're just stories, and I know they're things to work through now, but as you dive into it, as you dive more into those trauma points, you got to look at them and be like, oh, fuck. That one conversation X amount of years ago dictated how I saw myself and how I treated myself and how I operated then on. And it didn't even mean anything to these other people. It wasn't a big deal. It was just something kind of ignored or kind of just generalized. And yet it had profound effects on me. And that's, we're fickle. We're very fickle and sensitive beings. And it's like, man, we got to be kinder and more accepting to people. And it will serve us better to do that.
Kinder and more accepting of ourselves first.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
good. Very good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We're just resistant. Just let go of that resistance. And you know how they say the struggle is real. The struggle is not real.
No, but it is. It is. It really is. No, you're right.
That'd be a good T-shirt. The struggle is not real.
Not really real.
Yeah, it's not really real. It's only to the amount of your effort that you put into the struggle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, and there's an empowerment to that. It's like you can either be focused on the struggle, you can be focused on the suffering and just perpetuating the suffering. And that's something Sati always said, about it was always, I found this funny. I don't know if this is going to sound funny as I say it, but like he would talk about Jesus hanging on the cross. It's, it's like, why do you celebrate that, suffering when he stood for so much more than that moment of suffering? And I think there's something, beautiful wisdom in that, because it's like, I get it. That's a symbol of the sacrifice. Great. But I think the real gold is in how how he lived his life. I think the real gold is how he treated other people. I think the real gold is in how he treated himself and how he humbled himself. And, I think that it's interesting how what we focus on becomes our life. And that we know that's kind of spirituality 101, but even saying the struggle is real, oh, fuck, the struggle is real. I got to struggle for things to be real. That's going to feed that mechanism inside of you. And you're like, oh, shit, unless somebody tells you, hey, yeah, struggle, suffering, that stuff exists. That's real. But you don't have to suffer unnecessarily. You can focus on other things and you can focus on another way of being. That's where true power comes. And that's when you're sacrificing. That's when you're humbling yourself. That's when you're surrendering to other things, not what you're focused on.
Mm-hmm. I certainly am enjoying not struggling anymore.
Fucking Mexico over here.
Not just the Mexico.
No,
The Mexico
I know.
was a byproduct of the not suffering, right?
Right.
You
Right.
know?
Right.
But yeah, no, and you know what? I don't even remember when it stopped. It was that gradual for me. Like, I just remember I used to struggle and now I don't. And I don't know when that stopped.
Yeah, when the perspective shift happened, because it really is just a perspective shift, right? I mean, there's probably not that many different instances in your life. And that was actually a great question. Sorry, I meant to say that. You asked there at the towards the end, how being in a spiritual seeking process has changed your life or how you live your life. And I think that's a really great question, because that's kind of the one barometer you can use. And it's like, well, when did I stop struggling? Well, when did I stop being faced with struggle? Well, no, because you're
Faced with challenge.
Faced with challenge.
But that's your choice to struggle or not.
Struggle or not. Exactly. Right. Yeah. And that's so that's the question is you never really stopped struggling until you realized you didn't need to struggle anymore. But how long does that take? What's the process? Is it a moment? It unfolds.
It's a choice in every moment to not struggle.
Right.
But I don't know when it became second nature to not struggle, because it was probably second nature to struggle. Although I definitely have some friends that you can see they struggle a lot with everything. And I just have never been that person, but I certainly have had struggles in my past. But I really don't anymore at all. Like, doesn't mean I don't have challenges. Even on a daily basis, there can be some challenges, adversity and, things, but no, there's no struggle.
Yeah, it's food for thought. I don't have much to comment on about that. I got to look at that and see how that works out, because it's.
Do you think you're struggling with your question right now?
No, I don't have anything to add, really.
No, I mean, the question that who am I, the inquiry that you've been doing?
Oh, am I struggling with that? No, I don't feel like I'm struggling. I think my practice is to bring that question into everyday life as much as possible. When I'm starting to convince myself I'm struggling, my practice is to bring that question into that moment.
And who's struggling?
Exactly.
Who is it that's struggling? So that's the question, if you don't mind sharing with people.
Oh yeah. So after the Alea, I was kind of hit with this looking at the I, because you can't find the I inside of you. And so that's been my practice for quite some time. So it's like, well, who am I? And then you get a flood of I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, and then it's like, but I'm not really any of those things. Okay, well, I'm not those things. Who am I? List, and then, but I'm not really those either. And eventually, those lists get shorter and shorter, and then eventually there is no list. And so the only resounding, the last. So who am I? I'm like, well, I'm nothing. There's power in that, though. There's not a. It's like it's more of a I am no thing because I am all things, kind of an empowerment. Or
how about just I am?
Yeah, so that's the next phase. That's the next phase. Who am I? I am. Yeah. And after that, there's nothing else to bring. So, yeah, so to answer your question, I bring that question in when I start to be convinced that I am struggling. And when I'm starting to be faced with that story of, man, I'm really struggling right now. I'm suffering. It's like, who is? And then eventually, like, well, maybe I'm not really struggling. And then back to life, back to, the moment, back to the present time. So, and it's certainly not second nature at this point, but I'm not struggling to find the answer anymore because I ultimately know the answer. I know where I get when I ask that question, but that's the mantra, right? The mantra is just reminding me to stay in that space. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I don't know.
Remember, and that's what we started with when we got on the call today, not recording, but to be in the not knowing.
To be in the not knowing, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful place to be.
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just curious about everything and not knowing and not labeling and, and go out and experience when you walk outside, experience the weather, not naming it even as cold or hot, looking at a flower, not even naming it as a flower, just being in that, creating space.
Yeah.
That's how we started the evening on, is just in the Facebook Live, is just create space when you're using your intuition and you show up with no expectation, just show up in space.
Yeah.
And then there's room to breathe. And then there's creativity that flows in of, oh, I'm going to go to the market and pick up this and make this. And it's just a joyful day in the most simplest things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm finding those, I find, well, okay. So I'll start with, I've heard that people are making fun of people that like, there's kind of this joke running about like people that look at the sunset and like always taking pictures of the sunset and like making fun of people like fucking guys always taking fucking pictures of the sunset. I'm like, but have you seen a sunset? It's always amazing. It's like, so I'm coming from this space of like, I'm acknowledging the humor in that. It's like, yeah, okay, I could probably stop fucking posting these pictures of sunsets and sunrises, but also not feel and I don't feel ashamed at all. Like I have the opportunity most mornings. My property is long enough that I can actually get really good views of both, and I like the mantra of like fuck is really hitting me lately, because like I come out to the studio late at night and it's pretty dark out here, and I get through this wooded area, and it's weird. Like when you're out in kind of, and this is not wilderness, this is barely wilderness, but when you're a human who has very little ability to defend themselves, you walk into the woods area and you're kind of like your senses get heightened a little bit because you're hearing every little noise. It's really dark, so your eyes are dilating, and you kind of start to feel like this real awareness, right? You try to tap into the sixth sense because, fuck, it's dark, I can't see shit. And then I get through that little tree area, and it's just this field of fucking stars. And almost every time I get to that point, I just go, fuck. And I've done this probably 100 or 200 times. Just, fuck. Look at that shit. And it's the same sky every single night, but it's kind of, well, okay, I know we're fine, but you know what I mean? It's a dark sky with lights. But
yeah.
Yeah, obviously I know it's not the same, but it's not a new experience, and yet every time I see it, it is met with that same feeling, like as if it was. And that's kind of that awe I'm trying to bring into, when I go into meditation. It's just like, fuck. and be in awe of that space, but then be in awe of every space and be in awe of every interaction.
Yeah, I mean, I think meditation is, I was able to teach a couple of meditation classes while I was in Mexico. And, I think and I always say what Adyashanti is like the one line, if you could say meditation is one thing, it's allowing everything to be as it is.
Yeah.
And that's what it comes back to. The resistance is futile and surrender. And what we've been talking about is like, just allowing, the greatest gift you can give a person is to allow them to be who they are.
Yeah.
Just to be who they are. And we don't do that to the people we love. We just allow, if they want to be cranky or if they want to be, we just allow them just to be, because they're going to be who they are anyway.
Yeah. You just might exacerbate the more uncomfortable qualities if you resist what they are being. It's like, yeah, be you, man. Be you right now. If you need a moment, be you. If you be you too much, I might need to go away from you for a moment.
Yeah,
but
it doesn't mean you put up with it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
in meditation, we're allowing the experience, whether it's thoughts or no thoughts or mantra and no thoughts or falling asleep or whatever it is. It's really, and deepening that, like really every time you sit down, just really tuning into everything and just allowing the experience just to be. And then we start to bring that in our lives, and that's the no struggle.
Yeah. Hell yeah, man. Yeah. And that's life. That's where we're at. That's the journey. That's not the journey. It is what it is.
It's the seeker's journey, according to Sean and Corinne on the Turning Points podcast.
Turning Points podcast. So yeah, it was a great conversation. It reaffirmed a lot of those, and it was, beautiful new perspective, and it was very insightful, to have her share her life with us. So thank you, Mahaila. Hopefully we can have her back on another time and, keep going.
And we'll see you next Monday on Facebook Live.
Yes. Turning Points, High Points.
We don't exactly know what time, sometime between 5 and 8.
Sometimes between 5 and 5:15, depending on how long it takes to go live. And we'll figure that out, man. But I really appreciate that you are the one doing that, because I'm very, very thankful, because I just don't have the capacity for it. I don't. So thank you for everything you're doing in the background again.
Love you.
Love you too. Take care.
Night.